When a dog who normally follows you everywhere suddenly refuses to enter a room, that's not just odd behavior. That's a warning. But what if you ignore it? What if you rationalize it away, convinced that you know better than your pet's instincts? A man moves into a rental house with his golden retriever Max, and everything seems perfect except for one thing. Max absolutely refuses to enter the guest room. He won't cross the threshold, no matter what treats or toys are offered. He trembles when the door opens and bolts when forced near it. Most people would dismiss this as quirky dog behavior. And that's exactly what the new tenant does, until the room starts showing other signs of wrongness. Doors opening by themselves, unexplained cold spots, the overwhelming scent of old perfume, and the history that reveals a woman died alone in that room 50 years ago, still waiting for help that never came. This is a story about the warnings we dismiss, the instincts we ignore, and the spirits who need our help to find peace. Subscribe for more psychological mysteries that explore the moments when we should have listened but didn't. We here are real, even when no one else believes us. Sometimes we should trust ourselves over what seems rational. Subscribe for more psychological mysteries that explore the moments when we should have known but didn't. I should have known when my dog refused to enter the room, but I didn't. Animals know things we don't. They sense changes in the air, detect frequencies we can't hear, perceive dangers that remain invisible to human eyes. When a dog who normally follows you everywhere suddenly refuses to cross a threshold, that's not stubbornness. That's a warning. My dog Max refused to enter the guest room from the moment we moved into the house. I should have known something was wrong. I should have trusted his instincts over my own rationalization. But I didn't. I convinced myself he was just adjusting to the new space, being territorial, or reacting to some lingering scent from a previous owner's. I ignored what he was trying to tell me until it was almost too late. Max was a golden retriever, 3 years old, with the typical happy disposition of his breed. He loved everyone, greeted strangers with enthusiasm, and had never shown fear of anything except the vacuum cleaner and thunderstorms. He was my constant companion, following me from room to room, lying at my feet while I worked, sleeping at the end of my bed every night. When I decided to move from my apartment to a rental house in the suburbs, Max seemed thrilled. More space to run, a backyard to explore, rooms to investigate. The house was a modest ranch-style home built in the 1960s, with 3 bedrooms, hardwood floors, and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. The landlord had recently renovated it, updating the kitchen and bathrooms while maintaining the original character. It was perfect for my needs, affordable, clean, and in a quiet neighborhood. Moving day was chaotic, but exciting. Max explored every corner of the house, sniffing enthusiastically, his tail wagging constantly. He checked out my bedroom, the living room, the kitchen, even the basement. He seemed perfectly comfortable everywhere, except the guest room. The guest room was at the end of the hallway, slightly smaller than the master bedroom, with cream-colored walls and a large window overlooking the backyard. The landlord had furnished it simply: a bed, a dresser, a small desk. Nothing remarkable, nothing that should have caused any concern. But when I walked toward that room with a box of linens, Max stopped at the doorway. Just stopped, his body rigid, his tail lowered. I turned to look at him, expecting him to follow, as he always did. "Come on, boy," I called, gesturing for him to join me. Max whined softly, but didn't move. His ears were pinned back, his eyes fixed on something inside the room that I set down the box and walked back to Max, kneeling beside him. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, stroking his head. He leaned into my touch, but kept his gaze locked on the guest room doorway. His body was tense, every muscle coiled, as if ready to bolt. I looked into the room again, trying to see what had spooked him. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes floating in the air. The furniture looked ordinary, undisturbed. Nothing seemed out of place or threatening. "It's just a room," I told Max, my voice soothing. "Nothing scary in there. Come on, you'll see." I stood and walked back into the guest room, hoping he would follow once he saw me safely inside. But Max remained in the hallway, whining more insistently now. His tail was tucked between his legs, and he had backed up several steps from the doorway. I had never seen him act this way before. Even when he encountered unfamiliar dogs or strange noises, he might show caution, but never this level of distress. This was fear. Pure instinctive fear. But fear of what? I spent the next 20 minutes trying to coax Max into the room. I used treats, his favorite toy, even his food bowl. Nothing worked. He would approach the doorway, stretch his neck to sniff the air near the threshold, then back away quickly, as if he'd touched something hot. Finally, I gave up. Maybe he smelled something I couldn't, a previous pet, a wild animal that had somehow gotten inside, chemicals from the renovation. Dogs had incredible noses. He'd probably get used to it in a few days. I continued unpacking, and Max stayed close to me for the rest of the day, as long as I avoided the guest room. When I needed to put things in there, I closed him in another room first so he wouldn't see me enter and become distressed. By evening, I had mostly forgotten about the incident. Max was back to his cheerful self, playing in the backyard, eating his dinner enthusiastically, settling into his new home. The guest room issue seemed like a small quirk, nothing to worry about. That night, I went to bed exhausted from the move. Max jumped up to his usual spot at the foot of my bed, circled 3 times, and settled down with a contented sigh. I fell asleep within minutes, relieved that the move was finally complete. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to Max growling. Not his playful growl, or even his stranger at the door, alert bark. This was a deep, threatening growl I had never heard from him before. A warning. I sat up in bed, my heart already racing before I was fully awake. Max was standing rigid on the bed, facing the open bedroom door, his hackles raised along his spine. The growling continued, low and menacing, vibrating through his chest. "Max, what is it?" I whispered, reaching for the lamp on my nightstand. The sudden light made me squint, but I could see the doorway clearly. Nothing was there. The hallway beyond was dark and empty. But Max remained focused on something, his body tense, his growling intensifying. I grabbed my phone and turned on its flashlight, sweeping the beam across the hallway. Still nothing. Just the familiar shapes of the house, the bathroom door to the left, the guest room door at the end of the hall. Wait, the guest room door was open. I had closed it before bed. I was certain of it. I always closed doors at night, a habit from childhood. But now it stood ajar, a gap of about 6 inches, revealing darkness beyond. "Did you open that door?" I asked Max, which was ridiculous. Dogs don't open doors. But my mind was grasping for rational explanations. Maybe I hadn't closed it properly. Maybe the latch hadn't caught. Maybe a draft had pushed it open. Max's growling changed to short, sharp barks. He wanted me to know something was wrong. He was insisting on it. I climbed out of bed slowly, keeping my phone's flashlight pointed down the hallway. Max jumped down and positioned himself between me and the door, still barking, his message clear. "Don't go closer." But I had to check. I couldn't spend the rest of the night wondering what had frightened him. I walked toward the guest room, Max following reluctantly, staying pressed against my legs. The house was cold, colder than it should have been. I could see my breath forming small clouds in the flashlight beam. Had the heat turned off. We reached the guest room door, and I pushed it open fully, sweeping my light across the space. The room looked exactly as I had left it. The bed was made, the dresser drawers were closed, the window was shut. Nothing had moved. Nothing had changed, except the temperature. The guest room was even colder than the hallway, cold enough that I could feel it radiating out like standing in front of an open freezer. Max refused to cross the threshold, backing up instead, his barking now frantic. I stood in that doorway for a long time, trying to understand what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. Because logically, nothing was wrong. The room was empty, undisturbed, completely normal. But every instinct I had was screaming that something was deeply wrong. The cold, Max's terror, the open door, the feeling of being watched even though I was clearly alone. I closed the door firmly, testing the latch to make sure it caught. Then I returned to my bedroom with Max, closing that door too, and wedging a chair under the handle for good measure. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Max didn't either. He lay pressed against me, alert and watchful, occasionally lifting his head to stare at the bedroom door. In the morning, with sunlight filling the house and the events of the night feeling less immediate, I tried to rationalize everything. Old houses had drafts that could cause temperature fluctuations and open doors. Max had been stressed from a move and probably picked up on my own anxiety. We had both overreacted to normal settling noises and changes in air pressure. I called the landlord and asked about the heating system. He assured me it was newly serviced and working perfectly, but offered to have a technician check it if I was concerned. I declined, feeling foolish for even asking. Over the next week, I settled into a routine. I used every room in the house except the guest room. I kept that door closed at all times and avoided it as much as possible. Max seemed calmer as long as we stayed away from it, though he never stopped watching that end of the hallway with suspicion. I told myself I would eventually need to use the guest room. I had friends who might visit, family who might stay over. But for now, it was easier to just leave it alone, to pretend it didn't exist. That was a mistake, because ignoring a problem doesn't make it go away. It just gives it time to grow. 2 weeks after moving in, I came home from work to find the guest room door open again. Not just open, wide open, as if someone had deliberately pushed it all the way back against the wall. Max was in the living room, as far from a hallway as he could get, trembling. I checked every window and door in the house. All were locked from the inside. No one could have gotten in. No one was there except me and Max. But that door was open, and Max was terrified. I walked down the hallway slowly, my heart pounding. The guest room looked the same as always, but something felt different. The air in the room felt thick, heavy, like walking through invisible syrup. The coldness was there too, that unnatural chill that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the absence of something vital. Warmth, life, safety. I forced myself to enter the room fully, to examine every corner, to open the closet and look under the bed. I was determined to prove to myself that there was nothing wrong, that Max and I were both reacting to nothing. The closet was empty except for a few wire hangers. Under the bed was just dust and an old sock the previous tenant had missed. The window was still locked. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. Except I knew it wasn't. I sat on the edge of a bed, tried to steady my breathing, trying to think logically about what was happening. And that's when I noticed the smell. Faint but distinct. Floral perfume. Heavy and old-fashioned, like something my grandmother might have worn. I stood up quickly, looking around for the source. Had the previous tenant left something behind? A sachet in a drawer? But I had checked all the drawers when I moved in, and they had been empty. I pulled them open again. Still empty. No perfume, no air freshener, nothing that could explain the scent. Yet it was getting stronger, filling the room, overwhelming my senses with its cloying sweetness. I backed out of the room, my rational explanations crumbling. Something was wrong with this room. Something that couldn't be explained by drafts or old house quirks or residual scents. Something that Max had known from a first moment, but I had been too stubborn to accept. That evening, I did something I would have mocked myself for a month earlier. I researched the house's history. Not the recent history. The landlord had told me about the renovation and the previous tenant who had moved out for work. I dug deeper, looking for records, old newspaper articles, anything that might explain why this one room in an otherwise ordinary house felt so wrong. What I found chilled me more than any cold room ever could. The house had been the site of a death. Not recent. It had happened in 1972, more than 50 years ago. A woman named Eleanor Hartwell had died in the house. She had been 78 years old, a widow who lived alone. According to the brief newspaper article I found, she had died in her sleep of natural causes. Nothing suspicious, nothing violent, just an old woman reaching the end of her life. Except for one detail that made my blood run cold. She had died in what was now the guest room. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the screen of my laptop, reading and rereading that article. Eleanor Hartwell had lived in this house for 40 years. She had raised her children here, grown old here, and finally died here. In that room, the room Max refused to enter, the room that was always cold, the room that felt wrong in ways I couldn't articulate but couldn't deny. I looked up more information about Eleanor. Obituaries, property records, anything I could find. She had been described as a devoted mother and grandmother, an active member of her church, a woman who loved gardening and baking. There were a few photos, a thin woman with carefully styled white hair, always wearing dresses and pearls, smiling politely at the camera. She looked exactly like the kind of woman who would wear heavy floral perfume. I didn't sleep in my bedroom that night. I made a makeshift bed on the couch with Max pressed against me, and we both watched the hallway. Waiting, listening. Around midnight, I heard it. The soft click of a door opening. I didn't need to look to know. It was the guest room. Max heard it too, his body going rigid, a low whine escaping his throat. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it down the hallway. The guest room door was open. Again. "Eleanor," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Is that you?" I felt ridiculous asking the question, but what else could I do? If there was a presence in this house, if the spirit of a woman who had died here was still lingering, I needed to acknowledge it. I needed to understand what she wanted. The house went completely silent. Even the normal sounds, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, seemed to fade away. And then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from inside the guest room. Max bolted, running to the front door and scratching at it frantically, desperate to get out. But I remained frozen on the couch, listening to those impossible footsteps. They moved around the guest room, unhurried, as if someone was checking on things, making sure everything was in order. Then they stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds. I waited for something else to happen, for the footsteps to resume, for a voice, for any indication of what this presence wanted. But there was nothing. Just that heavy, watchful silence. In the morning, I called a friend who had mentioned being interested in paranormal phenomena. I felt embarrassed explaining the situation, but I needed help. I needed someone who wouldn't immediately dismiss what I was experiencing. My friend Sarah arrived that afternoon with a bag full of equipment, EMF readers, voice recorders, thermal cameras. She was thrilled to investigate, treating it like an exciting adventure. I appreciated her enthusiasm, even if I couldn't quite share it. Max refused to come out from under my bed while Sarah was setting up. She noticed his absence immediately. "Where's your dog?" she asked. Usually golden retrievers are all over visitors. "He's hiding," I admitted. "He's been terrified since we moved in. He won't go near that room." Sarah's expression grew more serious. Animals are more sensitive to these things than we are. If your dog is that frightened, we should take this seriously. We spent the next several hours investigating the guest room. Sarah's equipment registered several anomalies, temperature drops of up to 20 degrees, electromagnetic field spikes that had no source, and strange audio phenomena on her recorders. But the most compelling evidence came from the thermal camera. When Sarah pointed it at the corner of the room near the window, the screen showed a cold spot in the rough shape of a person. Not clear, not defined like in movies, but unmistakably humanoid. An area of concentrated cold in exact shape and size of someone standing there. "She's here," Sarah whispered, her earlier excitement replaced by genuine awe. "Eleanor is still here." We tried to communicate, asking questions and waiting for responses on the audio equipment. Most attempts yielded nothing, but occasionally we'd capture something, faint whispers, sounds that might have been words, electromagnetic fluctuations that seemed to react to our presence. Gradually, a picture emerged. Eleanor Hartwell hadn't just died in this house. She had died alone in that room, calling for help that never came. Her children lived out of state. Her friends were elderly themselves. She had suffered a heart attack in the middle of the night and died slowly, over several hours, unable to reach a phone or alert anyone. She had been found 3 days later when a neighbor noticed her newspapers piling up. For 50 years, she had remained in that room, trapped by the trauma of her death, still waiting for help that would never arrive. Still calling out in the darkness, hoping someone would hear. Max had heard her. From the very first day, he had sensed her presence, felt her distress, and tried to warn me. But I had dismissed his warnings, rationalized his fear, convinced myself there was nothing wrong. Sarah explained that spirits sometimes lingered when they died in fear or pain, especially if they died alone. Eleanor might not even realize she was dead. She might be caught in a loop, reliving those final terrified hours, calling for help over and over again. "She doesn't want to hurt you," Sarah said gently. "She's just scared and confused. She doesn't understand why no one comes when she calls." I felt a wave of compassion for Eleanor Hartwell, an old woman who had lived a good life, who had been kind and loving, dying alone in the dark. No wonder the room felt so wrong. No wonder Max refused to enter. It wasn't evil or malicious. It was just unbearably sad. We decided to try to help Eleanor move on. Sarah knew someone who worked with spiritual transition, not quite a medium, but someone who specialized in helping earthbound spirits find peace. Her name was Margaret, and she arrived the next evening, a calm woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Margaret spent time alone in the guest room first, just sitting quietly, opening herself to whatever presence was there. When she emerged, she confirmed what we had suspected. "She's been waiting for so long," Margaret said. "She's afraid to leave because she thinks her children will come looking for her, and she won't be there. She's been waiting for them to visit for 50 years, not understanding that they can't, that she's no longer part of their world." Margaret explained that we would need to help Eleanor understand that she had passed, that her children had lived full lives but were now gone themselves, that it was time for her to join them. It would take patience and compassion, but it was possible. Over the next 3 days, Margaret worked with Eleanor's spirit. She spoke to her gently, explaining what had happened, assuring her that her children had never forgotten her, that they had mourned her deeply. She told Eleanor that her family was waiting for her, not in this house, but in whatever came after. That it was time to let go of the room where she had died and move toward them. I stayed away during these sessions, giving Margaret space to work. But I could feel the house changing. The oppressive weight that had settled over it was lifting. The cold spots were becoming less frequent. The sense of being watched was fading. On the third evening, Margaret called me and Sarah into the guest room. The sun was setting, filling the space with golden light. The room felt different, lighter, warmer, almost peaceful. "She's ready," Margaret said softly. "She understands now. She's not afraid anymore." We stood together in that room, the three of us, as Margaret guided Eleanor through her final transition. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything specific, but I could feel something shifting, like a held breath being released, like tension dissolving, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden finally setting it down. The floral perfume smell intensified for a moment, overwhelming in its sweetness, and then it faded completely. The cold that had been a constant presence in the room dissipated. The air felt normal again. Just air, nothing more. "She's gone," Margaret said, and there was a smile in her voice. "She's with her family now. She's at peace." I felt tears running down my face, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Relief, maybe. Sadness for Eleanor's long, lonely wait. Gratitude that she was finally free. That night, for the first time since moving in, I opened all the doors in the house and left them open. I wanted to show that there were no more barriers, no more blocked thresholds. The house was just a house again. Max proved it. Around 9 that evening, I watched him walk slowly down the hallway. He stopped at the guest room doorway, the place he had refused to cross for weeks. He sniffed the air carefully, his tail lowered but not tucked. Then, cautiously, he stepped inside. He walked around the room, investigating every corner, his tail gradually rising. By the time he had completed his circuit, his tail was wagging. He looked back at me as if to say, "It's okay now. She's gone." I knelt down and hugged him, burying my face in his fur. "I should have listened to you from the start," I whispered. "I should have known." Max licked my face and wagged his tail harder, forgiving me instantly in a way that only dogs can. Over the following weeks, the house truly became a home. I furnished the guest room properly, making it welcoming and bright. Friends came to stay, sleeping peacefully in the space that had once been so troubled. Max claimed it as one of his favorite napping spots, sprawling on the rug in the afternoon sun. I often thought about Eleanor, hoping she had found her children in whatever existence came after this one. I hoped she was happy, surrounded by the family she had missed so much. And I thought about the lesson her presence had. Looking back now, I realize how close I came to living in that house indefinitely while ignoring what was right in front of me. If I had continued dismissing Max's warnings, if I had never investigated the history, if I had convinced myself that everything was normal despite all evidence to the contrary, what would have happened? Would Eleanor have remained trapped forever, her calls for help going unanswered for another 50 years? Would Max have lived in constant fear? Would I have slowly normalized a wrongness until I no longer noticed it? The guest room taught me something crucial. When someone or something tries to warn you that something is wrong, listen. Don't rationalize. Don't dismiss. Don't convince yourself that you know better than your instincts or the instincts of those you trust. Max knew from the first moment that something was wrong with that room. He tried to tell me in the only way he could, through his fear, his refusal to cross the threshold, his obvious distress. But I didn't listen. I told myself he was being difficult, adjusting poorly, overreacting. I imposed my rational explanations over his clear warnings because I wanted to believe everything was fine. I wanted my new house to be perfect, so I ignored the signs that it wasn't. We do this all the time, in ways both small and large. We dismiss the concerns of those around us because we think we know better. We rationalize away red flags because acknowledging them would be inconvenient. We convince ourselves that everything is fine because the alternative is uncomfortable. But sometimes everything is not fine. Sometimes the warnings are real. Sometimes we need to stop, listen, and investigate instead of pushing forward with our eyes closed. Animals, in particular, perceive things we miss. Their senses are sharper, their instincts less corrupted by rationalization and social conditioning. When a dog who loves you refuses to follow you somewhere, that's not stubbornness or bad behavior. That's a warning worth heeding. Max saved me from months or years of living in a house that felt wrong because I finally learned to trust his judgment over my own assumptions. More importantly, he helped me help Eleanor, though he never knew her name or understood her story. His refusal to enter that room was the first sign that something needed to be addressed, the first indication that someone needed help. I think about Eleanor often, especially when I'm in the guest room that was once her prison. I hope she knew, at the end, that people cared about what had happened to her, that strangers worked to help her find peace, that even 50 years later, her suffering mattered to someone. And I think about all the other warnings I might have missed or dismissed in my life, the small signs I rationalized away, the instincts I ignored, the concerns others raised that I brushed aside. How many opportunities for understanding, for helping, for protecting myself or others did I miss because I wasn't paying attention? So here's what I learned and what I want you to understand. When your dog refuses to enter a room, there's a reason. When someone you trust expresses concern about something, listen. When your instincts tell you something is wrong, even if you can't explain why, investigate. Don't dismiss warnings just because they're inconvenient or because you can't immediately understand them. Pay attention to the signs, especially the ones that come from sources more perceptive than your rational mind. Sometimes the truth is stranger than any explanation you can construct, and the only way to discover it is to stop insisting you already know what's real. I should have known when my dog refused to enter the room. And now, whenever Max hesitates or shows concern about something, I listen. I trust his judgment. I investigate before dismissing. Because he sees things I miss, senses things I can't perceive, and warns me about dangers I don't yet understand. That's not superstition or anthropomorphization. That's respect for abilities I don't possess and wisdom I'm still learning to recognize. If this story made you think about the warnings you might be dismissing in your own life, subscribe to Should Have Known Stories. Hit that like button to share Eleanor's story and the lesson Max taught me. And watch our next video, where we explore another moment when someone ignored the signs until they couldn't anymore. Until then, trust the warnings you receive, especially from those who love you. Listen to your instincts and the instincts of others. And remember that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected sources.